action.
Well, we kind of have three topics to discuss tonight. One of those is grade level goals and how those will pertain to developing a district goal. The second thing is an RTI update as to where our building teams are in regards to preparing for Wayne Callender's visit on Monday. He will meet with us again, and he has given us a homework assignment of looking at different intervention programs that we may want to purchase for intensive and strategic kids, as well as our scheduling, our master schedule at each building level, so that we're able to put that into the schedule to meet the needs of those kids. So we can give an update on that. And then the third component would be, if we have time, would maybe to be somewhat of a PLC update just since the last work session where we're at. I think we have shared all of the scores from Iowa assessments. We could discuss some spring testing that we did at the middle school level if we'd like to. So with that, maybe we'll start with the elementary team and go through grade level goals there first, and then move on to the middle school. So I did ask Nicole to go ahead and come up with a preschool goal. I talked to the kindergarten teachers, and we came up with a kindergarten goal as well. I don't know that we'll be able to figure those into an overall district goal, but I think it's good to have grade level goals even down in preschool and kindergarten as well, and it will hold teachers accountable. It will keep them focused and driven towards a literacy goal as well. So maybe Nicole, do you want to share your goal first?
Sure. Mine derives from the goal assessment that we have to use, and there's many different literacy aspects with that. So I just stated that each preschooler, the Clayton Ridge Preschool Program, will develop skills in the area of emergent literacy. These skills will include, but not be limited to, knowledge of the alphabet, phonological awareness, knowledge of print and its uses, comprehension of shared reading, including responding to books and other texts, and demonstrating emergent writing abilities. And I said our mission is to have the Clayton Ridge preschoolers to be 100% proficient with this. So I figure with the goal assessment, our goal is to get them to that kindergarten level. So each child, I think, if we work hard enough, should be able to be there. Because I think we were this past year anyways. So I'm going to push for it anyways. So that's what we have.
Good goal. Excellent.
And the goal assessment is the assessment that it is actually required now by the state of Iowa. It was when we first started it 2 years ago, would it be?
Yeah.
It was kind of on a trial basis, and so we went ahead and did that, and so we were a year ahead of what the state requirement was, and so I think that has benefited us.
Do they have state testing for preschool? I mean,
no, we use this goal assessment, and they have to assess them regularly,
okay.
And by multiple individuals. So it's not just the teacher that assesses, but the students or the associates as well.
So there's 38 objectives for each child, and I think like level 5 and up is like the purple bar, and that considers them kindergarten level, and then there's a blue area, and that's preschool, and then lower. But
okay.
Nicole, where are you at right now this past year? Did you end up at for a whole assessment?
I think everyone in the literacy was right at the end of the preschool bar, or just starting the kindergarten colored bar. So
close.
yeah, yep.
And we actually hadn't written a goal,
No,
of course,
no
last year,
goal.
but
Yeah.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah,
as
there
as
far
far as
as
being like what we would consider on grade level, that's what she.
Yeah.
to set something for next year, you kind of have to know what you did this
Yeah.
year, so you have some kind of a.
Mm-hmm.
So you was really close. That's good.
How many kids do we have going in preschool this year?
We'll be full with 17.
17.
Yep. And that's what we're able to hold in that preschool room with the square footage.
Good.
So just to recap, preschool, that class where the goal is that they'll be 100% proficient in those literacy skills that she mentioned, according to the goal assessment. So it's maybe more of a lengthy goal, and maybe it's broader in that it's not specific in one area of reading. But I think that it's something that we'll be able to measure, and we've talked to Chris Crowett from the AEA that will help us to determine that as well. So we might tweak it some, but I think it's a really good goal on Nicole's part to come up with there. So, Laura, do you want to share the kindergarten goal, or do you want me to go over that?
You're going to have to do that.
Okay. Well, at kindergarten, we did discuss several things. You can take the old ITBS assessment, so it's not part of the Iowa assessments like everybody else at kindergarten level. Normally what they would recommend if you want to test at kindergarten is to go ahead and take level 5, 6, I believe it is, which is what we give to first graders. So we've discussed that as a group. We may do that next year, just to see where they're at, and then that would give us a baseline kind of for the following year. But we'll probably discuss that further in the fall as with the kindergarten teachers and that team. So in the meantime, we did talk about the Jolly Phonics that they use, and this is the goal that the kindergarten teachers have written. By the end of 2013-2014 school year, 90% of all kindergarten students will know 90% of upper and lowercase letter names and 90% of the 43 Jolly Phonics sounds. And that's kind of based off of goals that they've kind of had for those kids in the past. That 90% of those kids will be able to do that. So it's not an Iowa assessment goal like you're going to hear, first, second, third, and so on. Anybody have any questions on kindergarten or preschool and kindergarten?
Do the preschool and the kindergarten work together on creating a goal? And I say that I know not every 4-year-old attends preschool that will go to kindergarten in the fall, but I don't know if there's repetitiveness in the goal necessarily, or I don't know if there's a way you can kind of work together on it, or.
I think a lot of the literacy aspects, to help them build up to reading is what, when we meet to talk is what they talk about too. And Jolly Phonics, we're working on that, and the letter sounds and letter recognition too. So.
Give us some insight on that 10% that we're not talking about there. What is your plans for that?
Well, I wouldn't want to exclude that you don't want to get 100% proficient.
Okay.
But I can tell you that there are some very high-level needs special ed students that are going to be
That's
there.
all in that?
Yeah, absolutely. Kindergarten I would say probably have some more discussion as well as how we might use our DIBELS assessments. There might be a goal that's written with that assessment. In fact, I would say that it's probably likely that we will.
Do you know what the percentage, like say, like we're getting classes here that are getting 89%, 88%, and proficient. Do you know what the percentage of them that are high needs kids are in there classes, or do you?
So how many?
What
is the percentage of high needs kids that are in that proficient level?
Yes, and where is it bringing them?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
But you're talking like trying to meet all the goals. If you have a class that's got 15% or 18% high needs kids, it's going to be really, really tough to meet those. No child 90%, 100% goal. I mean, it's just not gonna. It's a sorry thing to say, but it's not going to happen a lot of times.
Well, one of the things we talked about with the kindergarten is we don't know where those kids are. Some of those kids, because they're not all just coming from preschool.
We have kids
So
coming from Head Start, from
That's part of that
St. Mary's
20%.
preschool,
We don't have any idea where they're going to start.
not attending any center.
At what age do you consider a pupil a special needs child?
It can be as early as.
Well,
I mean, this is kind of a fine line, I know that, but is there any way, like when they're in kindergarten, you can work them out of that special needs area?
well, for
That's the
instance,
goal.
some
That's
students come into preschool on an IEP.
Right.
At 2 or 3 years of age. And we've had kids at the end of preschool that we've exited off of the IEP because they made that much advancement. In fact, we did that last year or this year,
This year for sure.
with 1 or 2 students. And then talking about when you put them on, for instance, we've had several kindergartners that, or first graders, I'm sorry, that we put interventions into place this year. At one time, we did an evaluation because we thought maybe they would qualify. Through the evaluation process, they did not, and we found that the interventions were working. And so we've kept a couple of kids from getting on an IEP, so that's a very positive thing as well. In fact, those 2 kids ended up proficient on the Iowa assessment.
Good.
So they're,
But it's actually working.
question.
It's actually working. Yeah, I mean it's hard to get percentages up when you have a large percentage in that, and to hear some success,
To me,
that's a positive, because
to
it's,
me, the more you can work with that, and the more success you have with that, the less problems we're gonna have here.
Well, I think you're gonna hear about that later when we talk about the RTI on the second agenda item tonight, when we talk about intervention
That's true.
programs and curriculum. So we'll try to address that
Sure.
for you there, Mike, because I think especially at K1 and 2, we're talking about those emergent literacy skills and wanting to really put a lot of emphasis on them. So,
Okay.
you want to talk about first grade?
First grade, I believe, is, they wanted to be 85% of their students to be proficient on Iowa test basis, or Iowa assessments, sorry. And they came up with that number because they looked at what the current kindergarten class is, and what they think their abilities are,
okay.
and that's pretty,
They looked at Dibble's assessments, end of the year assessments, to help determine that. And if you remember, I don't know if it was last board meeting or the one prior to that, but we went ahead and approved the hiring of a first grade teacher. So that's the 3 of them getting together along with Lori and Brenda Bodish and coming up with that goal. And, you know, when I think about the needs of that class after what we experienced in kindergarten this year, I think that's a very lofty goal, but I think it's very attainable for these teachers as well. So,
Can I ask another question? Do you find that there's a need for more help, like in the kindergarten, first grade, preschool? Do you need more help? I mean, as far as physical help, to help as the teacher with these kids, to get them off on the right foot? You know what I mean?
well, I think
more
that's what we
assistance
recognize this year,
Besides,
you know,
what we've done here with this
well,
teacher.
and that's why we've asked for that.
it really just depends on the group of kids you have.
Right.
Because, you know, this year's first grade, I would say not. But this year's kindergarten, I would say yes, we do.
that's what will be the flexibility of some of these, I mean, isn't it even, with your new program, right? You move people back and forth to help, I mean, help, well, where there really needs to be help, you know.
But I think you really need to throw everything you've got at this. I mean, if it needs more help, you need more staff. I mean, I think this is very critical. But that's my opinion. I don't know what John thinks, but
No,
any help we can throw at you to this kindergarten, preschool, first grade, that is interesting.
So I think now that we've gone through kindergarten, or preschool, kindergarten, and first grade, I think everybody has seen the goals that, the graphs that Mr. Nelson has prepared based on 5 years of data, I believe, maybe it's 4 years, 5 years, showing where cohorts of kids at each grade level have been, what percentage of that group has been proficient in reading. And so we're specifically looking at this last year's percentage of the class proficient to determine our goal for next year. So first grade going into second grade, our first graders, 100% of them were proficient on the Iowa assessments, and that particular grade level has chosen to keep the goal there. We're going to remain at trying to get 100% of those kids to be proficient. We didn't feel that we could lower the standard there. If you did look specifically at about 6 kids, they were just what we would say were on the bubble. They were just barely proficient. So they have written a separate goal for those kids. I think I actually brought it along here. And what they're going to do with those kids is slightly different than the rest, but what they've done is they've identified that those 6 kids, I believe, are like at the first grade, 4th month level. And they want to go beyond 1 year's growth and end up at the 2nd grade level and 7th month, so that they make actually 15 months gain in a year's time to keep those kids proficient. So that's how they kind of wrote a secondary goal for a specific group of kids. And I think that would be very appropriate based on what we've asked all the teachers to do in their PLCs over the last couple of years by identifying those kids and what are you going to do to get them to be proficient. So the goal for second grade then is 100% proficiency in reading. And when we come to third grade, so the second graders that were 87% proficient this year, going into third grade, Kathy Conley and Tammy Palmer are shooting for a goal of 90%. And roughly when you look at numbers in our size of a district with our 2 sections, that means every 3% is roughly 1 kid. So they're saying we're going to get 1 more kid to be proficient in that group. that's an attainable goal. Third grade going into fourth grade, 93% of that class was proficient, and so Bob Swears and Karen Geider, their goal is that they'll have 95% of those kids proficient. Some of the things that they do look at, just so you know, is they'll take a look at what students have moved out of the district. For instance, when we get to, I think, 5th grade going into 6th grade, you're going to recognize right away that there's 2 kids that scored quite well that are moving out of the district. So when you lose those 2 kids, you got to take consideration of those types of things. They also look at those kids, like we discussed earlier, that are on the bubble, just on the edge. So they try to help use that to determine when they write their goals. Some of the teachers went back and they looked at their history of what was the increase that they experienced on a yearly basis as they got a new group of kids. And so they averaged that and helped determine what their goal would be. So that's the elementary side of things. We've got 3 teachers here from the middle school, so I think I'll let them kind of share the middle school goals, and if they need any help or questions, I have it here that I can help with. So.
The 5th, 6th grade team looked at the 4th graders coming into 5th grade, and they had 83% proficiency. Their goal was not met, but it was really close. And so we looked at numbers, we looked at scores, we looked at kids, talked with Mr. Walls about specific kids and specific interventions that are occurring, continuing bringing those interventions up to the middle school so that the success that they are already having we can continue with. So we wanted to take that 83 up to 88%. And I know, and we know as a team, that that's quite a lofty goal to go from 83 to 88, but we feel like we're going to work towards that, and we're going to get those kids up there where they need to be. And
just a reminder with that group this past year went from 73% proficient as 3rd graders up to 83, so they did make a 10% increase in 1 year. So lots of really good progress with a challenging group of kids in my mind.
with 5th graders going into 6th grade, we know those kids, we've had them, we're looking forward to looping those kids and working with those kids again. And we're going to take their 86% and go up to 89%. We feel like looking at the kids, some kids that might be moving out or are moving out, and we feel as though that 89% is where we probably can be. So, I don't know if you have questions about that.
I think that's some very attainable goals. I mean, I see no reason why they can't be attained. I just think it's a work in progress right here.
It is.
It's gonna take time, but that's why my stress is start down here, get going here,
Right.
because it makes your job a lot easier, and I think it's a work in progress, and I think it's very attainable.
And we're looking, I know we're gonna get to this when we talked about RTI, but we have put a lot of intervention time in there. And something the 6th grade and 5th grade team worked really hard is we want to have RTI intervention time for kids at reading and math. Because right now the kids are only getting the reading, and we want those kids, because a lot of times those kids that need the reading also need the math.
Sure.
And so we wanted to make time so those kids could be in both areas. So that was something that we worked with
Do you know
scheduling.
what their proficiency is at math in these groups?
I don't. I have not. Well, Rondi probably knows stuff.
That's fine, I don't know if they were about the same, if they were low, or what they were.
Yeah.
Some of them would be pretty similar, slightly lower.
If reading, I mean, if you're having trouble with reading,
Yeah, and I know
99%
reading.
of
Well,
They're gonna
the
trouble with math,
deal was,
because
what
it's
Sarah
complicated.
said is that our kids either had reading lab or math lab, which are intervention
Sure,
times.
Yep,
And we just said reading trumps math, so
Right.
if you're struggling in both, you're gonna go to reading.
right.
And we couldn't get them scheduled into
Sure,
both.
sure.
But this year, we've made that work, so
We're
if you're a struggling learner in reading and math, you're gonna go to both labs.
Good deal. Both are very crucial, I mean, it's hard.
Yeah, it
Once
is
they-
hard
once they-
to, yeah.
And once they get behind, it's boy, catch up unless you can really get your interventions in. It's hard for them to get
Sarah
going.
really had the vision to hit the schedule with that, because you're only as effective during the school day as a schedule allows.
Right.
And so there was a team that Shane put together to put
Good.
the schedule together to make that happen, and Sarah was a big part of that.
We all work,
So, well,
all
Well,
worked hard at that.
it takes a team effort to do this.
Thank you. And I don't have scores
I
for, okay.
have some, Nate.
Seventh grade, or well, this year's sixth graders, when they took their Iowa assessments, 82.5% of them were proficient. Looking at who we've had move in and looking at the scores of where the kids were to see who we could bump up to proficiency realistically, we've set a goal for ourselves at 86% of the seventh grade students to be proficient.
New kids moving in, you'll give them assessment tests and right off the bat to know where they're at.
But if you have somebody move in at semester break, can you legitimately put that child in with these test scores? Or can you?
We are gonna be.
I mean, one kid can rock the boat, you know what I mean?
3%.
I mean, how do you do that?
Well, if they've tested previously in their district, so if they
Yeah.
move in midwinter and they took fall testing in their previous district, I mean, we could take those scores and take a look at them and see how they compare.
Yeah.
Sometimes we make a decision if we wanna retest or not test kids, based on when they move in. And there's some guidelines with
You look
Iowa
at-
testing programs to do that as well.
Part of their barcode has FAY on it, full academic year, and that can go into play, I think, when you report out to some of your
For AYP.
AYP. Thank you.
Where
Thank
do
you,
you,
forgot the
where do you
letters.
see, where do you see the kids difference, like say if I'm gonna test a child and they're at like 84% or 85% proficient, but if they're an A student, do you see that in the testing part of it, that they have problems or not?
Like test
I mean,
anxiety
yeah,
or,
I mean, a lot,
sure,
some
sure, we
people
see
do,
that.
are not good testers, and
And,
they're very good at
Not as, I mean,
We
schoolwork.
see that
but
some.
So,
But that's where multiple assessments help, you know, this is the
Okay.
Iowa assessment for
Okay.
that we're reporting here, but we also do the maps a couple times a
Okay.
year.
Okay.
There are the assessments, like, you know, the star reading test,
Sure.
with the RTI, there'll be some of those assessments. So, yeah, I guess we feel like we have a
We
good
get a-
handle.
yeah.
yeah, good handle on it, just what's the different styles, okay, because I mean, some people are poor testers, I mean, they know what they're talking about, or they do it, but they
We try to
can't.
recognize those kids and set up different procedures for them. You know, some kids just test well in sitting at the back of the room by themselves and not having 20 other kids around them.
Right.
Or in a small group setting.
I think we've taken some of that anxiety out too, just by pumping these kids up for it.
Oh, you mean the pre-test,
Well, and just
yeah.
even,
Motivational
Yeah.
things.
Sure,
Yep.
sure,
Yeah.
okay.
A lot of the day-to-day stuff that we do, you know, is in the same format as a
Yeah,
test.
that-
You know, it used to be that you would just write letter A down, but now you fill in the bubble for A, you know, and
Okay.
that is very simple,
Read a
but.
passage, answer questions similar to what you're gonna see
Sure.
in testing situations.
And then for eighth grade, so we looked at this year's seventh grade scores, and there was about 76% of them proficient. And looking at where those kids that weren't proficient fell and who we could realistically bump up, we decided to make a goal of 80%. And I think that we were about 80% when they did the spring test also. So,
Reading comprises of a lot of comprehension and vocabulary, meaning and words and everything. Where do you find that, I mean, in the middle school? Do you find that to be a problem?
when we look back doing the item analysis, we said a lot of vocab and like prior knowledge stuff, like if they knew, what was the one word, adversary, like they didn't pick up on what that word actually meant when it was talking about Great Britain and the United States. Well, if you have the background knowledge, you know what adversary means without even reading the passage, but
You know what test item analysis is? That's when they give us the testing book that the students read, and then we have the scores that our students have, and we're able to look and see, oh gosh, over 50% of the kids missed question number 5. So we go to the book and we look at, see what actually question number 5 in the book
I see,
says, and then we try to look at reasons, the answers are there that the kids gave too. So like if a lot of the kids gave C, then we think, okay, what were the kids thinking? And so then we try to reteach next year differently to address those situations.
But not the specific.
But no, not the specific test, because we can't do that. And
Well, you
the
can.
test change from year to year too.
It's hard to read.
Well, if we find out the question dealt with summarization, we know that we're gonna work on summarization skills.
Sure, right.
Because I think, was it a year ago, I don't know if he was on the board yet, but Nick Brown brought it up in high school, we said, would be surprised high school students that don't have a vocabulary, and that's a problem.
It's just a trend throughout, that's a PK.
And
Is
we,
it?
that
We have
problem
seen
starts
that.
with language in the preschool and then.
Well,
they
when
come in.
Rick was here, Rick Olson was here, and we were doing ITBS stuff then already. Back then, we already knew that vocabulary was an issue. I think it's neat.
So don't you think that we need to work on that just a little harder?
Well, I think that's a good
Huh?
way to go into the next subject, which is of the RTI plan.
Yeah.
And part of that RTI plan is this very specific vocabulary component of it. And we did implement that probably about the 1st of November last year, but we were probably behind in doing so. One of the things that Wayne Callender presents and gives to you is a vocab plan, and that's kindergarten through 12th grade. And part of that plan is more towards academic vocabulary, specific terms that kids are going to see when they take statewide assessments. So that's what we implemented, partway through the year last year. I would think that we'll come back to that next year and try to implement that maybe with a little more fidelity. And I think that teams work really good in their PLCs to come up with ways to introduce those words. And he actually had a procedure of what you do on day 1 and 2 of the week, day 3 and 4, then assess on Fridays. Gave some websites with free center activities. I know teachers researched that. They each were responsible for bringing several of those ideas back to the PLC that they could use. So I think we're moving in the right direction with it, I guess, is what I'm saying.
I think also it's given teachers a focus as far as, you pick up a dictionary and there's thousands and thousands of words. It's a crapshoot on what they're gonna be tested on. So, these words actually give teachers tools to help with the test. So,
I think with the lower grades, that I think some teachers were kind of like, wow,
Yeah.
we assumed a lot about, 5 and 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds,
Knowing their
what they do.
vocabulary and stuff.
Yeah,
Sure.
like line up in a straight line. What is straight? They don't, just those kind of things that they don't know, that we have to teach them.
Elementary teachers, you want to talk a little bit about our RTI plan? Whatever you'd like to share with board members, I guess?
I guess the biggest thing is we worked really hard trying to put together a schedule so that all kids have their core reading, and then they also have their core math, and they have an intervention time set aside every day for reading, and an intervention time set aside every day for math.
We moved the time of our reading from 90 minutes a day to 120. I think that'll be significant. That'll be a big change.
So, each student have their own, basically you're kind of looking for an own intervention in those small groups of kids, that what you're trying to do? Try to keep
Right.
groups together, rather, you're not gonna just individually, but you'll also have like 4
We'll
people
try
that
to,
are kind of.
okay, small groups of kids that hopefully are kind of at the same level. Kind
Sure.
of like what we've done with our common reading time. In fact, I think that'll look very similar, where
Okay.
kids are ability and flex grouped together, multi-age, and but we're able to use some specific intervention programs for those kids. What we've done in the past is we've just split them that way and then given them all the same core, but at their grade level, which I think has been very successful for us.
Sure.
But doing this, we're gonna put in some specific intervention programs, especially for those intensive kids, very scripted programs, where you teach multiple lessons a day, and that's where he was trying to impress upon us
A little more
that will help,
repetitive, a little more repetitive.
and that
too,
will
for-
help double achievement if you're doing multiple lessons in a day.
Sure, sure.
So,
So when you put these kids in groups, do you put the 80% ones in one group, 90s in one group, or do you kind of mix them up a little bit, or how do you do this? Explain that a little bit.
go ahead, Laura.
For the, my understanding is we have the core instruction, all the kids get the core instruction. And then we, depending on what their assessments, because we'll look at all their fall assessments and then decide, what does this kid need? Is this kid, especially like 3rd and 4th graders, do they need vocabulary? Is it phonics? Is it comprehension? What is their deficit? Based on that, then that's what the intervention will be.
So the last time Wayne was here, he met with the 3 building teams, and then as a district, all those 3 teams were together for that second day that he was here. And we decided as a district that anything help me with this, students below the 20th percentile, we said are going to be our intensive kids. And then we said any kids that fall between 21st percentile and 40. Then I think we actually bumped it to 50. Is that right? We said it was going to be the strategic kids, and then we went from 50 to 75, I believe, as your benchmark type kids, and then above that was advanced. So those kids are going to get broken down that way.
And you gotta do something with the advanced kids too, right? I mean, the intervention schools, I mean, go into their,
Yep.
help them keep going
Yep.
with it.
So back to what Lori was talking about with those intensive kids, what we're hoping to talk about later tonight is that when she says all the kids get the core curriculum, that those kids, because of where they fall, we're going to pull them out and give them an alternative core where it's going to be,
Which is much more intense.
yeah.
And it's just very strategic, very, and with those kind of kids, at least with my experience with those kind of kids, that's exactly what they need. They need it has to be the same every day. It has to be the same. You say the same thing, they repeat it, it's very scripted. What I've seen looks really good.
Middle school?
I guess,
We also have intensive, so anybody below the 20th percentile will receive the intensive instruction, which means that they would go to the lab time, but they'd also be getting a replacement core. So instead of going to regular language arts, they'll go to like what they're talking about down there and get that specific instruction that's very scripted. And I believe Ms. Wayne Callender said 80% is repeated every single time, and only 20% is new. So they're hearing it over and over and over again, and the scope and sequence just kind of builds on itself very, very slowly, so that they ensure that they're getting the concepts there. And then with our strategic plan, it's kind of the core plus more. And so they'll be given a placement test to figure out if it's a phonics, fluency, or comprehension issue. And then they'll be placed in one of 3 different strategic reading labs. And then that is the 20th to 50th percentile students.
What are you gonna do with the top guy? What are you gonna do? What's the
They
plan
will
for
go
the top?
to a science lab, so they'll be
Science lab,
getting
okay.
enrichment in the area of science.
And actually, some of those kids are going to get enrichment through Michelle Fossbinder that we hired
Yeah.
as the tag person.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
And some of them
The
will
high-
probably,
Those advanced
and some of
kids.
them may be in a math lab, depending on, if they don't have a reading issue and they're above that 50th percentile,
Sure.
so they could be, so I guess they're in one of 3 different places up there.
And I guess we should just mention that one of the things he had us do as a district too was at each building level decide what our assessment was going to be, what our screener assessment for these kids were going to be. So at the elementary, it's the Dibbles next, and then at the middle school, he advised us that the middle school and high school be the same. And so they met together at 2 buildings and came up with the Ames assessment. So,
That's what you use for your main assessment is Ames.
It's
a-
a,
screening
Yeah.
assessment.
Yeah.
it's a screeners to determine their needs.
Okay,
And then
And whether or not they qualify based on
Sure.
what the scores tell us.
sure.
So it's just another individual, so it's one of those, and then the other thing is a progress monitoring tool. So it will continually, every 2 weeks, those kids that have been identified will then be determined on the growth, whether or not the interventions have been successful,
Okay.
and whether we continue that path or if we take a different route. So,
You do that every
it's
2
a very
weeks?
valuable tool
Every 2 weeks, so good.
Only for intensive kids.
for
Oh,
intensive
oh, it's
kids.
fantastic, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
The strategic kids, it depends on what we wanna determine, but typically they'll get it 3 times a year
Okay.
for the strategic, like
Okay. Middle of the group. or
Yeah.
middle, middle of the
yeah,
group,
50, 20 to 50 percentile,
okay.
so, yeah. We've come a long way
Yeah,
in a
the
short
teams
amount of
have
time.
really worked really hard. We have spent 2 full days together just working on these specific issues of scheduling and creating the intervention times or lab times.
So how did it work out pretty good, getting the all timed in for everything or not? Or,
It wasn't easy.
yeah, let's say,
We could use school till 5 if you wanna.
what's that? Well, you can work till 5, we don't care.
well,
You actually work till 6, about it.
All of us were invested in regards to, we were gonna hammer out a schedule that's gonna be conducive to making interventions happen.
Good.
making sure kids are learning.
Well, I think,
So,
yeah, like Mike said before, you know, it's a team effort.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's on line, and you start down low and go to high, and if everybody plays, I mean, plays the best,
I think
it works
last-
great, you know.
I think last year I sat down with the middle school at one of our last meetings, and you stated you were at a crossroads. Just didn't quite know where to go. We brought Wayne in. You think you've kinda got beyond the crossroads then?
Oh, yeah.
I feel good. I feel
You do.
like we have a direction, we have some goals that we're working towards. I'm anxious, yeah, I'm excited.
There'll be a learning curve, I think. There's some things that we're gonna all have to learn how to, work at better.
Change.
So where did you think he took you off? I mean, where did he start you off? I mean, you're at a crossroads, you don't know which way to go. When he sat down with you, where do you think he took you off from?
When we're,
I mean, anybody here, I don't
when
think.
we were doing things last year, okay, we had, and they called it, research-based instruction, okay? And so we've got these research-based things and we're doing it, but it's not targeted towards a specific, you know how I said, if it's phonics, fluency, or comprehension, it's just a package deal. Everybody gets the same thing, and hopefully they're getting what they need. Now Wayne said you need research validated, so it's not just based on research, it's actually validated by research.
Right.
And then it's gonna target and hone in on the specific skill that those students need. And an idea of pulling kids out of, language arts class, you know, that was something that was kind of
I'll just say,
shocking.
probably the biggest frustration point for teachers in PLC conversations is we looked at the data until we have it on the back of our hands. We know it,
Right.
and we know where those kids fall. However, we didn't feel equipped to make the right decisions on, yes, and Wayne has brought ideas to the table of, this is what you do if this happens. This is the recipe if this is what this kid is struggling. We didn't have those recipes ahead of
I think
before.
what we found is
So-
that we had put in intervention time and we had pulled all the right kids, but what we were doing is we were just supplementing them, we were just giving them extra help, but
Sure.
not specific skill.
Well, yeah, I mean, if the guy was good at, if the student was good at comprehension and you're giving him more comprehension, you're just wasting his time. I mean, he's already good at that, he needed help with,
The fluency,
yeah,
right,
with
right.
the fluency or
He
something.
wasn't
Yeah, right,
fast
yeah.
enough,
Sure.
yeah.
And from the people I've talked to in the teaching, that's I've heard it over and over. I mean, it's like, we know what's wrong, but how do you fix it and fix it good? I mean, fix it right. You can put a patch on it, and I think that's what we were trying to do the last couple of years, right? I mean, you can put a patch on it and it helps a little bit, runs a little bit smoother, but the tire's gonna go flat sooner or later. Now we got a new tire on it, and let's go in the right direction. I mean, I think that's,
But I think, getting back to Sarah and what I've been hearing, every year it's the same percentage coming back at you, that you just cannot deal with. And I think it's old, when you can't deal with that. That
Oh,
percent.
definitely.
And
It is.
hopefully this guy will come in
And what's sad, it is sad, because I feel good about it now, but it was always the same kids.
Same
If
old,
Johnny
sure.
was,
yeah.
you know, not proficient in second grade, he's probably not gonna be proficient still in sixth grade.
Right.
I mean, it's that predictable.
Yeah, we
And
once we get behind, it's tough.
It'll be exciting to see that you can take Johnny and make the changes, make the gains, and
Right.
actually see that and be monitoring it all throughout. So it's,
Well, and that's where the goal, I mean, the teacher, I mean, yeah, when you see it really happening, that's what
Yes.
it's really, I mean,
Yeah.
fulfilling in your
Yeah.
job, you know.
I've got a big excuse, I've got a guy waiting for me at the hall. I gotta sell 4 tires on the parking
go
lot.
ahead.
I sure enjoyed your company and your whatever here, and I hate to leave you, but I.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions?
Oh, yeah, just, well, good, I'm glad, I hope it works really well, I mean, I think, you know, grasp it and go well with it, I know.
You know, I think too, he's been doing this for a long time, and he is a specialist at it.
I guess, I'm really surprised that people weren't taught this in college, I mean,
Yeah.
how to, I mean, when you go to be teachers, I mean, this is part of teaching and how to, and I can't believe that they never had anything in place like that before.
Well, it's just it's a system approach that has failed, really. I
Right,
mean,
yeah.
in a way, and you know, you don't take, like, I love his analogy. You don't go to the car shop and take your car in, and 3 months later you find out what's wrong with it. Cause
Right.
that's the system that education has set up for our
Right.
kids,
It has,
is we
right.
evaluate, this is what's wrong, but
Yeah, one car
Good
came,
luck.
yeah,
What else is
one
on
car
fire?
came
Yeah.
out, yeah.
Try the fire extinguisher.
Yeah.
Try the garden hose.
right,
Try some more, we'll bring the trucks in now.
right.
But it is the truth, I mean, they've been doing it for hundreds of years, right?
Just push the red button.